Story. This September, I was at a Young Life dinner for all the leaders that help with Young Life, and I met someone new there. Her name is Cassie Luttrell. Cassie Luttrell is a Christian in town who she runs all the sports stuff, administration pieces of all the different sporting teams for the high school, and helps with some of the middle and elementary school stuff as well, the planning, the logistics. Her husband, Matt Luttrell, is the head coach of the football team. And I met her, got to know her, didn't think much of it. It was just a dinner. And then 3 days later, I got a text from her. I didn't have her number before this. Got a text out of the blue. Hey, this is Casey Luttrell, and I have a unique opportunity for you. Will you please call me back? Okay, this is at the point in the sermon where I must confess I'm a terrible person. Okay, because when I heard unique opportunity 3 days after meeting you, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm getting sold on an MLM. Okay, here comes the multi-level marketing scheme. I may or may not have done some Facebook stalking to see if I could figure out what it was for. My guess was, okay, it's all this sporting stuff, like maybe it's some kind of athletic wear or something. So I waited a few hours, then I gathered up the courage, and I called her back. My strategy was to try to say no and not buy anything. But, if I had to, maybe like I could buy a couple pairs of shorts to wrestle in or something like that, nothing too serious. You know what I mean out there, right? You've been here before trying to get through this situation. So I call her, she picks up the phone, and sometimes you just get a phone call that you're like, oh, that is not what I was expecting at all. I did not have this on my bingo sheet for the day. It was one of those kind of phone calls. Cassie says, hey, I need a favor. I got a really unique opportunity. The Division II football school, MSU, Texas. They're out of Wichita Falls, Texas, Middle State University. This secular school, their football team is staying in Salida before they go over Monarch Pass to play Gunnison on Saturday. And the football coach wants a local preacher in town to preach to them. Will you do it? What? I didn't think that was coming. That came out of nowhere. And I bring this up because this is often what I think following a disciple is like. Or being a disciple of Jesus is like. Boring. Routine. You're going through the rhythms of your everyday life, and then occasionally, out of nowhere, you get a curveball like this. Like, where did that come from? What does that mean? What does it look like? And so as we conclude our series today on following Jesus, this is what I want to talk about. Of how do we sustain this? How do we continue this on as we follow Jesus with our life? Pray with me as we get into it. Our Father in heaven, we come again seeking to follow you. As we follow you as your disciples, give us the strength to continue on this journey, not just today, but into the future and for the rest of our lives, God. I pray that your Spirit would work in our hearts today to give us eyes to see your plans for us, how you're working in our lives and how you're working in the world. Pour through me the gift of preaching that we may have the courage to follow Jesus wherever he leads us. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. Okay, so take a second with me to recap where we have been in this series. We started off by talking about what a disciple is. A disciple isn't just someone who believes in Jesus. A disciple is someone who follows Jesus. Their actions are the actions of someone who would try to follow Jesus to the best of their abilities in life. And so we learn that Jesus' goal is not to make converts. Jesus' goal is actually to make disciples, people who are following him. And so one has to count carefully the cost of following Jesus. And often when we think about the cost associated with following Jesus, we think about things being worse in our life, or the harder, a higher level of piety that we're called to, of rule following, a higher level of commitment, and what we might lose because of that. But we talked about we're not factoring everything in there. We must also factor in the cost of not following Jesus. If we don't follow Jesus with our life, what kind of life does that lead to? What kind of life does that give? So if you're going to follow Jesus, if you're going to follow your rabbi, you have to know what a rabbi stands for, right? You have to understand the rabbi's teachings. You have to understand Jesus' teachings, how to keep them, what it means to follow Jesus. Going deeper, a vine gets its strength from the tree, from the trunk, or the vine. So in the same way, in order to be a disciple of Jesus, we have to be connected to Jesus. This means that we keep up our spiritual disciplines of things like prayer, of study, of worship. We spent a couple weeks in this series hearing from two of our shepherds. Last week you got to hear from Jim. Before that you got to hear from Tim. And they were so humble for you. They gave you a gift, I hope you can recognize. The gift of showing their weaknesses, of where they've fallen, where they've failed in life, and how God has walked alongside them, has grown them on this journey as they've learned how to follow Jesus better and better throughout their life. Yet, we cannot forget that if we are disciples of Jesus, we never just exist for ourselves. Disciples have changed the world by going outside the walls of the church and serving the hurt and broken in the world. And it also is beautiful in the midst of this to remember that we do none of this alone. Disciples have always had each other to walk alongside, each other to carry each other through the difficult seasons of life and to persevere. And this all brings us to today. Today, where I want to point out that a disciple is a noun and not a verb. I must confess that us preachers sometimes use it as a verb, and it can be a little confusing. We can talk about how we are discipling someone, or we can talk about how someone discipled us. And it's showing the action of what it means to be a disciple. But primarily what I'm trying to say is being a disciple is part of your identity. It's who you are, it's your calling, it's your purpose. And so we might have all kinds of titles throughout our life. Important titles, like parent or grandparent or vice president or CEO. And ultimately, being a disciple is above all of these things. Instead of asking the question, how do I be a good grandparent or a good disciple or a good manager? The question is always, what would a disciple of Jesus do as a parent? How would a disciple of Jesus run a business or serve on a board? Being a disciple of Jesus is our primary call or focus. And sometimes I believe we sell ourselves short of this. Our confidence is a little too low. We don't realize the significance of our job. So I've enlisted some special help today to teach us about it. Watch this video as we learn about the significance of our job.
I sat next to this lady on an aeroplane and I said, hello, where are you going? She says, I'm going to Singapore. Then she said, what do you do? And I said, I work for a global enterprise. She said, do you? I said, yes, I do. I said, we've got outlets in nearly every country of the world. She says, have you? I said, yes, we have. I said, we've got hospitals, hospices, homeless shelters, orphanages. We have feeding programs. We do educational work, we do justice work, we do marriage work. I said, basically, we look after people from birth to death, and we deal in the area of behavioral alteration. She went, wow. Her wow was so loud, everyone turned around and looked at us. She goes, what's it called? I said, it's called the church. Have you heard of it?
Have you ever noticed we put a just before a lot of the things that we do as a church? I'm just going to church. Someone asked me, what are you doing in town? Oh, I'm just a preacher in town. Or there is no just before the work we are doing here every week. This is the most important work in all of the world. Nothing is greater. No calling is higher to give your life to than this. We must not forget it. But more than what we are just physically doing, there's something so theologically rich, something so beautiful that we are doing that I want to give a bigger perspective of it. So I want to take you to the great training ground for the first disciples, the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee where Jesus goes to call his first 4 disciples who are out there fishing. And that's where it starts. These 4 disciples who are fishermen, who didn't pass the test, who what we would describe as the blue-collared workers of their society, he says, follow me. While the majority of all the other wannabe disciples out there were going through what would be the equivalent today of a doctoral program so they could ask a rabbi, could I follow you? Do I have what it takes to follow you? Jesus finds 4 regular guys and says, follow me. And they changed the world. These average Joes wake up and live into this calling of this radical way of living, and they change the world because of it. Acts 4 testifies to this fact. Peter and John are brought before the rulers, the elders, the scholars of all of Israel because they are living the words of their rabbi. And when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. What an honor it would be for people to say the same thing of us. They might be ordinary, average, broken, but man, they're doing some amazing things. Jesus seems to be with them. A great example of this training ground and what happened is Peter's walking on water. It's a crazy story. We often don't realize it. In the middle of the night, around third watch, would be 3 a.m, Jesus comes walking on the water towards them. The deity of God is on display in this moment. I believe Jesus is glowing as he comes to them. And they see this, and Peter asks the dumbest question of all time. Lord, if it's you, ask me to come to you. What? He's walking on water in a storm. No. Just sit and wait. See if it's him. He might pass you by and it might be all right. You don't need to yell that. Why would Peter yell that? Because he's a disciple of Jesus. A disciple always does what their rabbi does. He's the oldest. He's the leader of the group. He has to be the one to speak out. So what's the natural thing to do for a disciple when you're in crisis? God, if it's you, call to me. And then the realization hits. Jesus says, yeah, come out to me. I wonder if Peter's like, what have I gotten myself into? As he puts his leg over the boat. And he starts walking. And here in Peter, we see maybe our biggest problem too. Because Peter has complete faith in Jesus the entire time. How do we know this? When Peter's sinking, he calls out, Lord, save me. It's not his faith in Jesus that is insecure. It's his faith in himself. Do you notice that when he's walking on the water, looking at Jesus confidently, not worried about the wind and the waves, he is doing the unthinkable. But when he doubts, he's really doubting himself. And he's looking at everything around him saying, can I be doing this? Will this really happen? But when he fixes his eyes on Jesus, everything is all right. You know what? My whole life, I have been told to believe in God. Sometimes I think it's our focus as preachers that, man, if we can just get people to believe in God, to make a statement of faith, to be baptized, whatever. And that's important. But as disciples of Jesus, do you know what I think we really need to hear today? Is that Jesus believes in you. Jesus believes in you enough to entrust his kingdom to you. He believes in you enough to ascend to heaven and allow you to be his hands and feet on this world. And the doubt we often have is about ourselves, our perceived inadequacies, failures, shortcomings, and weaknesses, and saying, can I really do this, God? And Jesus is like, yes, this is what I trained you to do. You can do this. And so Jesus knew this might be one of the biggest fears for us, one of our biggest weaknesses. So he told the first disciples, he gave them this first warning in John 15, verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go bear fruit. Fruit that will last. May you believe in God. May you believe in Jesus. But may you believe that Jesus believes you can be like him. The calling is for these ordinary, broken people that you and I might feel oftentimes like, to say, you know what? We're going to follow Jesus because Jesus thinks we can do it. Jesus thinks we can be a person of love, of compassion, of truth, a person of peace and joy and hope. Another way of saying this is, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Next week, we're going to start a journey with Matthew, a journey with Matthew that will take us from Christmas through Easter. And the question as we open up that book, and every book we study after that, is what does this mean for a devoted disciple of Jesus? What is the truth? What is the thing we are to glean and learn from as we seek to follow Jesus in our life? That is what we are trying to do as we go forward. So once again, let these words from you and my's rabbi stand out to you. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Jesus has faith in us. Faith we can do it. And generations of disciples, his first disciples, were his hands and feet. They did this very thing. But the question in the present is, will we? Will we do it? With that in mind, I want to tell you what happened with my preaching opportunity. I told Cassie, sure, I'll do it. I'll preach to them. But, there was one thing I had to do, a caveat. A young adult who grew up in this church, Drew Johnson, is the outside linebacker for Western State. So I needed to make sure I let him know before, I preached to his opponent. And I texted him, I said, do you want me to preach on something really depressing, like Lamentations or something? He said, absolutely, get him really low. I actually ended up preaching on Philippians 4:13, deconstructing and reconstructing that incredible verse, but I didn't have to put them down at all. They were already going through difficult times. The head football coach texted me twice, delaying my arrival. Their charter buses from Raton to here really struggled getting over the passes. It had been a long day for them in the car. They were staying up at Monarch Lodge. The food was behind. I told Silas he could come with me. We showed up there at 8 o'clock at his bedtime. Photo credit Silas here. He took this picture. That's why the trash can's bigger than me. We get up there and they're just starting to eat dinner. They're going through they're hungry. A few of them have altitude sickness. They're not doing very well. The defensive coordinator pulls me aside and he goes, "Is this building safe?" He goes, "I feel like the lodge is about to fall into the river here." And I said, "Yeah, it's probably not safe. Good luck." And so we thought about that as we're all gathered on the river side of the building, the way it's leaning, like the entire football team. And so it's getting close to about the time that I'm supposed to get up and speak. And I'm thinking, man, it is late in the day. I'm just going to get up there, I'm going to do a quick talk. He's going to ask me to speed things up. We're going to get through this, okay? But they are tired and exhausted. That is not what happened. The head coach pulled over all the position coaches and said, "We're getting ready to do chapel. You need to make sure every single one of your players is here. And if they're not here, it's on you." You should have seen those coaches working. Man, they were checking, they were going through everyone, and we sat there. Then we get up, and I'm thinking, okay, it's time to preach. And the head coach goes, "Nope, that's not it." He pulls out a sheet of paper, and he does roll call. There's about 75 guys on the college team. They're behind. There's about 100 people in the room, and he's doing roll call. We go through every single name, and one defensive tackle decided he didn't want to hear me preach. You know what happened? Head coach goes to the defensive line coach, "Go get him." And we sat there in silence until he arrived. And it made me think, do we take church that seriously? I mean, do we take it that seriously if one of our brothers and sisters isn't with us? I don't mean legalistically, like, "Oh, you better be here on Sunday." That's not what I'm trying to preach here. I'm saying, oh my goodness, what we are doing is so important. Get here. Be sure you can be here and be a part of it. We'll delay church for you to be here. This is so important. And then I'm getting ready to go up and preach in front of a bunch of college kids at 9:30 at night. I'm tired. They're tired. I'm thinking, this is going to be rough. You know, they're not going to be doing very well. They're not going to be so focused. And again, I was surprised. Every single one of them was sitting up straight, was on their edge of their seat, hanging on to every single word I had to say, as if what I was teaching to them gave them the insights on how they could win tomorrow and how they could have victory in life. That's how serious they took it. And I got done, and they went on to all their position meetings where they went through the game plan and how they were supposed to play the rest of the week. And I left impressed. Impressed because a bunch of secular kids at a secular school maybe take their faith more seriously than we do here. I mean, it was a high calling. And driving home that night, I thought of one of my favorite teachers, my favorite class. It came to mind. My college professor was a guy by the name of Mike Cope. He taught my freshman Bible class the life and teachings of Jesus. It is the best class I have taken in my entire life. I fell in love with Jesus in that class. I learned what it means to be a disciple of Jesus in that class. And he ended that class the same way I have ended every single sermon in this series. Will you follow Jesus wherever he leads you? That's the question I try to answer in my life. Okay, Jesus, you've led me here, or maybe I've gotten myself into this mess and I'm here. How do I follow you? How do I follow you out of this? How do I continue to follow you in my life day after day? And I try to do that to the best of my ability, just like a few fishermen on the edge of the beach did that day. That's what they did with their life. Now, Brian mentioned this in class today. We studied this with all of class, and this is what hit me this week about our Bible reading, is that Peter was just trying to be faithful to following Jesus. And go home and read Acts chapter 10 through 12. Peter is basically just minding his own business, doing the boring, the mundane things of praying, of studying, of trying to follow his rabbi. And then he has a dream. He's like, well, what's going to happen with this dream? And then he walks downstairs and there's people like, hey, the cops want to see you. But not like a bad thing, like a Roman centurion has prayed that you would come visit with him, right? So he takes this long journey to go see him. And he realized that an angel had gone to him and that they were to meet together. And like, what are we supposed to talk about? And they talk about a few things and piece together what it means on this bigger picture that God is trying to include all of the Gentiles into God's kingdom. And then someone else comes and meets with him and takes him away. And then he's taken away later to Antioch. And it just seems pretty boring and mundane on a smaller scale. But on a larger scale, when you start to piece together how the Spirit of God is working in all of our lives, these amazing things tend to happen and pop up. And so while I could portray as following Jesus as pretty boring and mundane and not that exciting, I must admit that following Jesus has taken me to some of the craziest places. All over the mountain peaks standing around us, to 2 different developing countries, different continents, and maybe the scariest place of all, my next door neighbor's house. God takes us to crazy places. And so will you follow him? This summer I was wrestling with that, and there's a common feeling I think we get as disciples where God is calling us to a higher level. And the temptation is just to stay down here like, this is so intimidating that you're calling me up to this level of service or this level of following you or this level of commitment. Can I just stay right here? And Jesus says, no, follow me. Keep coming. Keep climbing, keep learning, keep letting me mold you and shape you and grow you into one of my disciples. And it was interesting to me to realize I wasn't alone. There was a song that Christian worship leader in Nashville, and she's a lead singer in a band, wrote about this. She was struggling with this feeling of wanting to be complacent in her faith, but realizing God was calling her to more. And I stumbled across this song, and it stayed with me for a long time now. I listen to it most Sundays before any of you arrive. This calling to step out in faith, and it means even more to me because many of the students in this video I've had the opportunity to minister to at church camp. And it's almost like they're ministering back to me. So I encourage you to think and have a time of meditation or sing along or pray with God during the time as we listen to this song together. But let me ask you, the decision is yours. In your life, will you follow Jesus wherever he leads you?
I could just sit and wait for all your goodness, hope to feel your presence. I could just stay right where I am and hope to feel you, hope to feel something again. I could just sit and wait for all your goodness. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper.